Wyoming Territory, 1877. The wind carried dust across the town of Red Hill as Willow Norran stepped down from the stagecoach with nothing but a carpetbag and a limp that drew eyes like flies to a wound. She paused beside the depot, her right leg stiff from the long ride, the pain sharp in her hip. Her skirt fluttered around her ankles as she shifted her weight, trying not to wince. A group of boys near the general store snickered. One of them, no older than 14, cupped his hands to shout. "Look it, the broken doll's come back." Willow's throat tightened, but she didn't answer. She just clutched the strap of her bag and kept walking, slower than she liked, toward the only place she had left her uncle's ranch outside town. She hadn't seen him in nearly 9 years. Not since the accident. The limp had started after the fire that took her parents and nearly her leg, too. She had been 8 then. Her uncle sent her away to a boarding school back east, saying it was better for her, but she'd never been allowed to return. Not until now, and only because he was dying. The ranch had not changed. The fences still leaned, the barn still sagged under its own weight, and the dust still clung to everything. What had changed was the man in the bed. Her uncle lay pale and thin beneath a rough wool blanket. When he saw her, he coughed, then turned his face away. "You should not have come," he rasped. "I had nowhere else to go," Willow said, setting her bag down by the door. He looked at her leg, then back at the ceiling. "You are not strong enough to run a ranch, and no man will take you with that limp." "I did not come here for a man," she said quietly. But it did not matter. The ranch hands avoided her. The housekeeper gave her cold glances, and when her uncle died 3 days later, the will left her nothing. They buried him at dawn, and by evening she was standing by the gate with her bag again, turned out by the very people who had come to eat his food and drink his whiskey. "I will give you a ride to the edge of town," one of the men offered, not meeting her eyes. "But best you find somewhere else to be. This land is not for the weak." She rode in silence, her hand gripping the wood rail of the wagon, her leg aching with every jolt. At the edge of town, she stepped down and nodded her thanks, even though her throat burned. The wagon rolled away. Behind her, a horse whinnied. "You need help?" The voice was deep, calm, and didn't carry judgment. Willow turned and saw him, a tall cowboy with dark hair curling under a worn black hat, reins in one hand, the other resting easy against his thigh. His name, as she would soon learn, was Merritt Boone. "I am fine," she said, straightening her shoulders. "You are limping," he said, not unkindly, "and you look like you were just kicked out of something." Willow looked away. "I will manage." Merritt dismounted and walked over, leading his horse. His boots crunched the dry earth. He looked at her, really looked, not at her leg but her face. "You got somewhere to go?" She shook her head. He nodded once, then said, "I got a small homestead just outside town, 2 rooms. Chickens. A goat named Luther that hates everyone but me. You are welcome to stay as long as you need." Willow stared at him. "You do not even know me." "I know you are alone," he said, "and I know what it feels like to be mocked for something you cannot change." She blinked, startled. "Were you," he looked out over the hills, "lost my brother in the war. Folks said I should have been the one. He had the charm, the laugh, the future. I just had fists and a horse." Willow said quietly, "That is cruel. People are," Merritt said, "but I am not them." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right." He helped her onto his horse, lifting her gently without a word about her leg, and led them both out toward the hills. His homestead was a simple cabin with a porch that creaked and a fire already burning when they arrived. She sat near it, hands outstretched, and he brought her coffee, the tin mug warm against her palms. "You can take the bed," he said. "I will sleep in the barn." "You do not have to. I want to," he said softly. That night she lay under a quilt, listening to the wind outside and the faint creak of the barn door swinging. Her body ached, but for the first time in days, her chest did not feel quite so tight. The next morning, Merritt handed her a biscuit and asked if she could help with the chickens. She nodded. He did not ask her to hurry or move faster than she could. He worked beside her, quiet but steady, as if he had been doing it with her for years. Days passed. Then a week. Luther the goat did, in fact, hate everyone but Merritt. Willow tried to feed him once and got headbutted. Merritt laughed, the sound warm and deep, and patched her coat where it tore. "You should not stay here forever," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun fall behind the ridge. "You deserve a life." Willow looked at him. "Maybe this is one." He turned to her. "You think so? I like the quiet," she said. "And the fire, and you." His eyes did not leave hers. "I was hoping you would say that." Her hand brushed his. He did not pull away. Instead, his fingers closed around hers, gentle, certain. "I do not care about your limp," he said. "I care that you get up every day and help with the feed and smile at my dumb jokes. I care that you are here." Willow swallowed hard. "Everyone else told me I was broken." "They were wrong," Merritt said. Then he reached up, cupped her cheek, and said low and sure, "You will not walk alone anymore. You will walk through life with me." Her heart swelled so fast it hurt, but it was the good kind of hurt, the kind that felt like healing. She leaned into his hand and he kissed her, slow and real. And for the first time since she was 8 years old, Willow Norran felt like she belonged. Merritt had a way of working with silence that made it feel less like emptiness, and more like space being held for something honest to grow. Willow learned this on a morning when the frost clung to the grass, and the sky was the kind of hard blue that made your eyes water just looking at it. She was rolling up her sleeves to wash the ash from the hearthstone when he came in with his sleeves damp and cuffs rolled. He carried a bucket of creek water and a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. "I traded with the Dutch woman who keeps bees near the South Ridge," he said, setting it on the table. "She gave me bread and a jar of honey, said you ought to have something sweet." Willow wiped her hands. "She doesn't know me. She said you helped her son when he twisted his ankle last week, sat with him until his pa came back." Willow glanced down. He looked afraid. "I just waited with him." "That's more than most would have done." She didn't answer, but she did unwrap the bread and cut them each a slice. The honey was thick, amber-colored, with a wildflower scent that lingered even after the jar was closed again. She poured a little over the bread and handed him a piece, then took her own and sat across from him. He bit into it and gave a quiet nod. "Could be you're better at making people feel safe than you think." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "I don't try to." "You don't have to." They ate in silence after that, and when they were done, Merritt asked if she wanted to ride with him to check the traps he'd set near the creek bend. She hesitated at first, but then nodded once, stood slow, and reached for her shawl. The mare was gentle and walked steady. Merritt helped her up without calling attention to it, and they followed the narrow trail that wound between the cottonwoods and the low hills beyond. "You ever miss being somewhere else?" she asked after a while, her voice low beneath the birdsong. "I tried Denver once," he said. "Worked cattle up near the Front Range. Too many men shouting, too many streets that didn't end in sky." She looked ahead, where the trail narrowed beside the creek. "I thought the East would feel brighter than it did, but it was all cold rooms and quiet rules. I felt like I was never enough for it." "You're enough for this," Merritt said, not looking at her. "You see things people miss. You move careful. That matters out here." They reached the first trap and Merritt dismounted. Willow stayed on the horse, watching as he knelt, freed a rabbit and reset the snare with practiced hands. He didn't rush. Everything he did had a rhythm to it, like he wasn't just working the land but listening to it. When he stood again, he looked up at her. "You ever trapped before?" She shook her head. "No, but I watched my father dress game once. He said I had too soft a heart for it." Merritt walked the horse forward and touched the mare's neck. "You don't have to be hard to survive, just steady." Her eyes met his. "You think I am?" "More than most." They moved on to the next trap and then the next, talking less, but the quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was more like the hush between two pages in a book, something waiting, not something missing. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun hung low and gold across the hills. Willow's back ached from riding, but she didn't mind it. Merritt led the mare to the rail, helped her down without a word, and then turned to unhitch the small game sack from the saddle. Inside, the fire was already catching. She stoked it while he skinned the rabbit out back. When he came in, he handed her the cleaned meat wrapped in a cloth. "You want to cook it up?" She nodded and took it from him, and he stood watching her for a moment before he said, "I notice you never ask for help, even when I see you hurting." Willow kept her hands moving as she lit the stove. "People stop offering when you say yes too often." "I'm not people," he said quietly. She turned, the firelight catching the edge of her cheek. "I know." He didn't press her after that, just sat with her while the stew cooked, and when they ate, he offered her the larger bowl without comment. She took it, heart heavy and soft in equal measure. Later, when the stars came out and the wind turned colder, she stepped out to the porch with a blanket tight around her shoulders. Merritt joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "I don't know what comes next," she said after a long while. "You don't have to," he answered. "You just have to stay." She looked at him, and this time she didn't hesitate before leaning her head against his shoulder. His arm came around her, warm and sure. She didn't speak again that night, but as the wind moved through the dark, she let herself rest against him, knowing he would not ask her to move faster than she could. April settled into the valley with a hush that made the creek run slower and the cottonwoods tremble softer in the wind. The earth came awake in small, quiet ways, green shoots pushing through frost-bitten soil, the hens laying with more regularity, and the sound of frogs returning to the banks after long silence. Willow folded her mended skirts over her knees and dusted flour across the table. Her hands moved with practiced care as she shaped a rise of dough into flat rounds for the pan. Merritt had left early, heading to a neighbor's place to help mend a broken fence. He'd offered to show her how to shoe a horse next time, and she'd nodded, though her stomach turned a bit at the thought. She finished cooking, wrapped the warm bread in cloth, and stepped outside. The air smelled of thawing sage and distant wood smoke. The cabin stood quiet behind her. Luther paced by the fence, twitching his ears at shadows only he could see. By the time Merritt returned, dusk had pressed itself deep into the corners of the land. He carried a cut on his cheekbone, thin and sharp as a paper slice. "What happened?" Willow asked, stepping down from the porch. "Fence rail snapped back while I was hammering," he said, brushing dried mud from his sleeve. "Caught me just above the eye, nothing deep." She cupped his chin and turned his face toward the light. "It bled," he shrugged. "Most things do." She wet a strip of cloth and pressed it gently to the wound. He didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened just enough for her to notice. "You didn't have to take that job," she said. "I didn't do it for money," he replied. "Wes Carter buried his wife 2 months ago. He's got 3 boys and no one else to help him keep a roof from caving in." She finished cleaning the cut and stepped back. "You ever ask for anything in return?" "Not once," he said. Later they sat near a low fire. The bread had cooled but still tasted of salt and smoke. He watched her from across the table, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking," he said. "You ever consider keeping hens of your own?" She blinked. "Here, no reason you couldn't. There's room behind the barn. I can build the coop." She set her cup down. "You think I'll be here long enough for that?" "I hope so," Merritt said. "I'd like to plant corn this year. Could use your eye to tell me when it's strong enough to thin." Willow looked down at her hands, the flour still clinging to her knuckles. "I never stayed anywhere longer than the seasons made me." "Then stay for the planting. Stay past it." He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. "You've got a way of making this place feel more lived in than it ever did before." Willow held his gaze for a long moment. "I don't know how to build a chicken coop." "I do," he said, "and I'll show you." The next day she followed him to the edge of the clearing where the ground sloped gentle and dry. He marked the corners with strips of burlap, then handed her a small mallet and showed her how to drive stakes into the ground. The sun warmed her shoulders, and though her leg ached after an hour, she didn't stop. He noticed but said nothing, only offered her the canteen when she paused to catch her breath. "You tired?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "but I'm not done." That night her muscles burned from effort she wasn't used to, but the ache held a kind of pride. When she lay on the bed, blanket tucked to her chin, she listened to Merritt moving about the cabin, checking the latch on the door, setting the kettle to boil. She spoke into the dark. "You ever think about what it'd be like if things had gone different? If your brother hadn't died?" A long pause. "I used to," he said. "But it doesn't change what is. I came back from the war with more ghosts than sense. I had no one waiting for me, then I met you." She exhaled slow. "I still hear the fire sometimes, in my sleep." He came to the doorway, leaning against the frame. "You don't have to tell me about it." "I want to," she said, voice steady. "But not tonight," he nodded. "I'll be here when you're ready." When she closed her eyes, there was no smoke, no heat, only the sound of Merritt's breath across the room and the slow rhythm of a life being rebuilt. The next morning they returned to the coop. Merritt handed her a saw, showed her how to brace the wood before cutting. Her first attempt came out crooked, but he didn't correct her. Just adjusted the next plank to fit what she'd made. By the end of the week, the coop stood finished. Willow painted it with leftover whitewash, her eyes narrowed against the glare. Merritt stood back, arms crossed, watching her. "We should get pullets from the Fraziers," he said. "They've got a strong flock." Willow wiped her hands on her apron. "You think they'll sell to me? If they don't," he said, "they'll answer to me." She didn't smile, just nodded once. "I'd like brown eggs, not white." Merritt's mouth curved. "Then brown it is." That evening, as they sat beneath the porch eaves, she leaned her shoulder into his. He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "You ever think about what kind of garden you'd plant if you stayed?" he asked. She turned her face toward the fields where the last of the sun flared behind the hills. "Lavender," she said, "and squash. Something that comes back every year." He kissed her temple, slow and sure. "Then we'll give it ground to come back to." The first market day after the thaw drew folks from across the valley, their wagons creaking under sacks of seed, coils of rope, baskets of preserves they'd bartered or grown. Merritt hitched the mare near the edge of the square, where the earth had dried to a crust after last week's snowmelt. Willow stepped down slowly, her shawl tight across her shoulders, her weight shifting carefully as she adjusted to the uneven ground. Merritt glanced toward her as he tied the reins. "You all right? I'll be better once we're past the staring." She said it plainly, without bitterness. It was just a truth, something she'd carried long before Red Hill. He offered her his arm, not because she needed it, but because she might want it. She took it. The market buzzed with low chatter and the shuffle of boots across dirt. Pigs squealed behind rail pens near the far end, and the smell of yeast and sweet tobacco tangled in the air. They passed a row of tables where women haggled over yarn and dried apples. Merritt paused at a stall with a rusted bell hanging from one post. "Afternoon, Eustace," Merritt said. The old man behind the table leaned forward, wiping his glasses on the edge of his vest. "You come for the pullets?" Willow stepped forward, Only if they lay strong. Eustace blinked, then gave a sharp nod. Brown shells. Good layers. You'll get 2 eggs a day once they settle. They'll be under my care, she said. They'll settle just fine. Merritt watched her, the corner of his mouth lifting not in amusement, but with something steadier. Pride, maybe. They loaded the crate into the wagon without trouble. Willow settled beside it, one hand resting on the slats as the hens shifted and clucked inside. On the road home, the sun caught the edge of her cheekbone, and Merritt caught her watching the trees pass. You spoke like you'd been buying hens your whole life. I spent enough years being told I couldn't do things, she said. Now I say them like I can. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, I like hearing that. They rode in silence after that, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was no rush to say it. That evening, Merritt brought in a cedar box from the barn. Inside were tools most worn, 1 or 2 still sharp, and a strip of leather wrapped with care. I want you to have these, he said, setting them on the table. Willow ran her hand lightly over the handles. They're yours. My father's before me, but I never had cause to teach anyone with interest. She looked up. You think I'll take to carpentry? I've seen the way you mark measurements. You keep lines straighter than I do. She studied the contents of the box. I never made anything that lasted. You're making a life, he said. That night she carved her initials into the underside of the coupe door. Small, careful letters. She didn't tell Merritt, but he found them days later and didn't say anything, just sanded the edge smooth so the wood wouldn't splinter. As the days lengthened, they fell into a rhythm that wasn't spoken aloud. She rose before first light to check the hens, gathered eggs with her skirt hem bunched in one hand. Merritt split wood without needing to be asked. They ate side by side in the evenings, not always talking, but always listening. One night the rain came hard and sudden, drumming the roof like a warning. Willow stood at the back door, eyes narrowed at the dark. I should go check the coop. They're dry, Merritt said. I fixed the leak last week. I still want to see. He didn't stop her. Instead, he fetched her coat and walked with her into the storm. The coop held. The hens clustered toward the far side, feathers fluffed. Willow knelt to scatter extra feed, her skirts dampening at the hem. Merritt crouched beside her, watching. You used to flinch at thunder, he said, quiet. I still do, but not tonight. He didn't reach for her, she didn't ask him to. But when they stepped back into the cabin, dripping and cold, she turned to face him in the firelight. I want to stay, she said. Not just through planting, not just through spring. He didn't answer right away. Just stepped forward, his hands gentle as he brushed her wet hair from her face. You don't ever have to leave, he said. Not unless you want to. I don't. Her voice didn't shake. Merritt rested his forehead against hers. Then this is your home now. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her like something he never meant to let go. The rain softened outside and the fire crackled low, and the steadiness of their life took root beneath their feet like something planted deep, ready to grow. By the time the cottonwoods leafed out fully, and the creek thickened with meltwater, Willow had begun to sleep with her window cracked open, just enough to hear the night birds and feel the cool air move over her skin. The hens were laying regular as clockwork, and Merritt had finished mending the back gate without needing to be asked. One morning, Merritt returned from town with a bolt of muslin and a small tin of indigo dye in his saddlebag. I figured you might want something that's yours, he said, setting them on the table. Not patched hand-me-downs. Willow touched the cloth with both hands. Where'd you get it? Traded extra seed to the dry goods man. He owed me besides. She ran her fingers along the edge. I haven't sewn for myself since I was 16. No rush, Merritt said. It'll keep. She didn't answer, but that night after supper, she laid the muslin across the table and began sketching out a pattern by lamplight. The shape came back to her slowly. Like a tune half remembered the curve of a sleeve, the line of a bodice that didn't need to flatter, only fit. Merritt watched from the rocking chair, one hand resting on the arm, the other curled around a mug of coffee gone cold. "You ever think about what we'd have done if we'd met sooner?" he asked. She didn't look up from the cloth. "No, I don't think we'd have been ready for each other." He nodded slow. "You're right." The next morning, Willow took the dye pot outside and boiled it down until the water turned deep blue. She dipped the fabric, stirring with a branch, and hung it to dry between two posts. The wind tugged at the cloth, and the color darkened as it dried. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Merritt handed it to her without breaking the seal. "It's from the woman who raised me back east," Willow said, turning it over. "I hadn't heard from her in years." "You want me to go inside?" "No," she said. "Stay." She opened it carefully. The paper crinkled in her hands, and her eyes scanned the page, her mouth pressed flat. When she finished, she folded it and set it on her lap. "She remarried," she said. "A man with land in Vermont. She says she hopes I'm well, but that there's nothing for me back there." Merritt didn't speak. "She was never cruel," Willow said, "but when I walked through her halls, I always felt like I was taking up space meant for someone else. You aren't doing that here. I know." She looked toward the barn. "It's the first place I haven't." They moved easily through the days that followed. Willow sewed during the warmest hours, the muslin stiff beneath her fingers, the stitches neat and tight. Merritt built a new trough for the hens and started shaping a second planting bed near the kitchen window. One evening, as the wind picked up and the clouds gathered low, Merritt came in with his shoulders damp and his collar turned up against the cold. "There's a wagon down off the south ridge," he said, brushing water from his sleeves. "Two wheels slipped into the mud." "They'll need help," Willow nodded. "I'll come with you. You sure? I can bring blankets and coffee. If there's children, they'll need warming." By the time they reached the wagon, the sky had gone near black. A man and woman stood beside it, legs caked in mud, trying to coax their mule forward. Merritt dismounted and stepped into the muck without hesitation. Willow followed, handing off a blanket to the woman, who looked too thin for the coat she wore. They worked until the moon broke through the clouds. Merritt wedged stones beneath the wheels and the man lashed branches for traction. When the wagon finally lurched free, the woman clutched Willow's hand. "You most folk here?" she asked. "No," Willow said. "We're only ourselves." She and Merritt followed the couple back to the main road, then parted ways where the trees opened wide. On the ride home, Willow leaned into Merritt's side. "You didn't flinch once," he said. "I didn't have reason to," she answered. The next morning, Willow stepped outside in the dress she had sewn indigo with a square neckline and sleeves that reached her elbows. The hem brushed her boots and the fabric moved easy when the wind passed through. Merritt looked up from the porch steps, hammer still in hand. His eyes softened. "You made that." "I did. It suits you." "I made it for the life I want, not the one I had." He stood, set the hammer down, and walked to her. "You've built it already." She didn't look away. "Then I want to keep building it, with you." Merritt reached for her hand, warm and calloused. "We've already started." They were married that Sunday. No preacher, just a neighbor with a Bible and steady hands. Willow wore the indigo dress, and Merritt wore the same black coat he had worn the day they met. The hens clucked in the background, and the wind stirred the grass around their boots. After the vows, they shared bread and coffee with the handful of folks who had come to witness. No speeches, no music, just the sound of chairs scraping against dirt and the low hum of voices carried by wind. That night, Willow and Merritt sat by their fire, the cabin quiet but full. He reached for her hand, and she laced her fingers through his without hesitation. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "You do now. I'm not afraid anymore." "Good," Merritt said. Because we've got raspberry bushes to plant come morning and I'll need your eye on the roots." She leaned her head to his shoulder. "Then I'll be there." And she was, through the spring rains and the dry summer heat, through the first frost and the second harvest. They worked side by side, building out the garden, adding a second henhouse, shaping a life that didn't rush or demand, only endured. Willow's leg never stopped aching, but she no longer felt ashamed of the limp. It carried her through fields and across porches, beside a man who never asked her to be anything but exactly herself. Years passed. The indigo dress faded at the shoulders, and the kitchen filled with jars of preserves and drying herbs. Merritt carved a cradle one winter, his hands slow and careful over the curved wood. When Willow laid their daughter inside it for the first time, she wept without hiding her face. They named the child Clara, after Merritt's mother, and she grew with dirt under her nails and laughter in her lungs. Willow taught her to sew. Merritt taught her to split kindling, and every night they ate together beneath the low beam of the kitchen lantern, the fire warming their backs, the peace they'd earned settling deep into the bones of the house. Nothing grand, nothing loud. Just the quiet, steady love of two people who'd found each other when the world had no more use for pretending. And in that, they found everything they needed.